Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel, or if you're new, hello! Today we are talking about advanced color theory, and by that I'm talking about the stuff that I didn't cover in my previous color theory videos. I'll have them up above or down below or wherever. You can find them in my playlist teaching. But regardless, I did those a couple years ago. I talked about a whole bunch of points and I just kind of let the topic go because I was like, whew, tired of this. But then I got an email from a lovely person named Batul, and it completely reopened the color theory discussion again. And there's so many things about color theory that are kind of ambiguous, weird, strange, optical illusion-y. And I didn't touch on those in my previous videos, but then when I was writing about them in my email, I was like, this is useful information to share. So I wrote for the first time in forever, I actually wrote some notes about what I'm supposed to say, but I'm doing this on the fly regardless because it's just, there's so much. So forgive me if this video sounds a little weird. Also, you don't have to watch the other previous color theory videos to watch this one. I mean, I'd recommend it, but you don't have to. It's just, this is just a little bit more advanced-ish, but it's still good information to hear no matter what level you are as an artist. So let me try to get into it, shall we? Okay. So the big point that I made in my previous videos about color theory was that you need a limited color palette. I'm not talking 10, I'm not even really talking 5. I'm talking 3 or 4 colors really is the most ideal palette. And at first glance, that might be how the hell can I work with only those colors? But when you think about it, if you mix those colors, let's say there's 3, picture like a triangle here. You've got a huge spectrum of colors to play with. If you're working with red and blue, there's a million different purples that can be made between those two that can help you with your color palette. So those are the hues. That gives you a huge range of hues to play with. And then on top of that, you can change the saturation and the values. So let's say you have a color palette of orange, red, and purple. So you've got a whole bunch of reddish oranges that you can play with. You've got your purples, you've got all this really cool stuff. You can change those colors so you could have a really dark purple, or you could have a very pale pink, or you could have, I don't know, a very desaturated orange, more like a potted plant kind of orange. So there's a whole bunch of different things that you can do to kind of twist and meld that color palette. You're not limited to 3 markers, 3 markers of color. You're allowed to mix and meld and play with those kinds of things. That said, you can't go too crazy because let's say you have a color, let's say you're doing a landscape or an interior and you're using those 3 colors and you have pastels and neons and jewel tones and earth tones, and technically they're all in the same color world, but it's just so many different kinds of colors, right? That's not really what we're going for. That's a very difficult look to pull off. That's for someone who really knows what they're doing. So instead of trying to reach for the stars and do that kind of a thing, it's good if you pick 2 color worlds to pick from. And by that I mean some kind of color scheme-ish for non-important things and some important color scheme-ish for the things that you want people's eye to go to. For example, let's say I have a color world, aka a background, that is very pastel-y and very cute and soft, very light colors. And then I would have my characters, my focal points or whatever, have very saturated colors, really bright colors. That way the characters really pop off the page because I'm focusing on them and they're not going to just kind of disappear in this pastel-y world. Or maybe you've got a color world that's very dark. Everything in your world is just dark. Maybe it's nighttime or something. Then maybe your focal point, some fireflies or something, or some fairies or whatever. Maybe they're in light colors and they're just kind of dancing across the page. I don't know what your particular predicament is, but if you have opposites, dark and light, bright and soft, muted, saturated, you can allow your viewer to have resting zones and also know where the focal points are. As much as we want to have color harmony where everything is just beautiful all over, you want your viewer to have some place where they know they can focus on. You have to guide them somehow. And color is a really great way to do that. So that's one thing, the color worlds. So the color worlds are a huge part of that. You have to kind of just pick one and stick with it. Otherwise you're gonna get a chaotic mess. Another thing I want to talk about are ambiguous colors like grays or like muted colors, because those are just, they're weird. And let me break down weird. For example, one of the questions that I got asked by Batul was, you know, how can you tell if in a really kind of ambiguous color is a warm or cool tone? Because sometimes you just can't tell. Bright colors like a magenta or a lime green are really easy to pinpoint because they have so much pigment to them. A lime green is going to lean more warm because it's got more yellow in it. A magenta is also going to lean more warm because it's got more red in it, versus like an indigo, which is going to lean more cool even though it has some purple undertones. That stuff we can pretty easily figure out on a color wheel, but then there are colors that are just kind of strange, like a soft green of a penny, or a kind of denim-y, like a faded denim kind of color, or just really just grays in general, like a warm gray or cool gray. Anything that's a little bit more desaturated automatically becomes confusing to our eyes. The problem with colors and color theory in general is that colors can change wildly depending on the surroundings that they're in. So if I take an ambiguous color like that denim blue color, or like the faded denim blue color, and I put it in a very warm world, like lots of magentas and hot reds, that denim blue is going to look very, very cool. It's going to stick out like a sore thumb. If I put that same blue in a very cool tone world, lots of blues and purples and ocean tones, it's going to look very warm and it's going to pop out again. That same color will look completely different. And that's why there's a whole bunch of websites and games and stuff where there are optical illusions, and it's like, oh, can you tell what this color is? And then you're like, oh, it's orange, and then they'll like put it against something and it actually is green or whatever the hell. That's how optical illusions work. If you take a color and you put it in a color world that either goes against it or goes with it, it can completely change, right? So the rule of thumb is if you have an ambiguous color that's more desaturated and murky, it's going to look the opposite of the color world that it's in. If you're putting it in a warm world, it's going to look cool. If you put it in a cool world, it's going to look warm. So what do we do with that information? How do we actually like put that into practice? Let's say we are working in a very red world. Like let's say our characters are like inside a volcano or something, and it's just reds and oranges and yellows everywhere, right? But let's say all of our characters are wearing jeans. For some reason, they're very unprotected in this. If you color those jeans like a normal blue that you just like pick from your color palette and you put in, those jeans are gonna look so bright. Like they are going to just like fight you, and they're just gonna be so intense. We don't really want that, okay? We're gonna pick a grayish tone and we're going to make those jeans much more gray than we're expecting, because it's still gonna pop out as blue. It's still gonna come off as a cool color because it's in a warm world, but it's not gonna jump out as much as just a normal blue would. It's all, you want it to kind of fit in that warm tone color world, and you don't want everyone to be staring at the pants. You want them staring at this freaking molten lava that's everywhere. Or opposite situation, what if we're talking about something that's underwater and our character has red hair? If we're talking about Ariel or something. That person, that hair, you're not going to want to select like a normal orange or red. You're going to want to go a little bit more desaturated because it's going to pop out too much if you select a color that you think is going to work. And it's so weird, guys. Like, it's really, really weird because you'll be picking your color in like Photoshop or whatever, and you'll think to yourself, this is ugly as hell. There's no way this is going to work. And then you'll color it in and you're like, wow, that's actually too much. I need to desaturate it even more. That sometimes desaturating colors is the right way to go. The more desaturated your color palette is, the easier it is to work with, because the more value something has, the more of an announcement it has. You know, it calls our attention. So if those colors don't really work well together, we're going to notice it immediately. Whereas if everything is more desaturated, they're going to blend together well. They're more harmonious because they don't have a lot of values to compete against. They don't have much value, period. So if you're really, really shy with color, you can start off doing desaturated colors or doing light colors, anything that doesn't have a lot of value to it. That's a great way to kind of dip your toe in, but it's not really where you want to stay forever. If you're very cautious about color theory, you know, do like a very pale pastel kind of world, and then slowly incorporate some bright colors, incorporate some dark colors. And then once you feel a little more comfortable with that, you can just keep adding to it and adding to it until eventually you can have these really vibrant worlds where your eye is still able to focus and not focus. And back to talking about focus, another way that you can get a person's eyes to focus on something besides having one color world versus another color world is contrast. So light versus dark is a really great way to get people to notice something. The lightest part of your drawing, if it's right next to the darkest part of your drawing, that person's eye will instantly go there. Like instantly lock on that thing. If you have a character who's wearing a bright white t-shirt, but they have very, very, very dark skin, that character is going to be like the easiest thing to pick out in pretty much every single scene because our eye gravitates towards that contrast, right? So that's a good way if you want to make someone's eyes go somewhere. It's also good to know that darks and whites, when they're next to each other, influence one another. So let's say you're working on like a charcoal drawing and you've kind of overworked the paper and you just can't erase anymore and it's just stuck at like a mid-tone gray. If you want that mid-tone gray to look whiter, you just have to surround it with black. And that gray will instantly look lighter to our eyes because our brains are not that smart. When it comes to color, it's constantly fooled by things. So if you take a color and a mid-tone color and you put it next to something really, really dark, that mid-tone will look brighter. Same thing if you have like a really bright thing. If you have like a really, really white world and then you have like a mid-tone gray, that mid-tone gray will look so much darker than it actually is. So that's something to keep in mind. Maybe you're working on something that you need to fool your viewers into thinking that something's darker or lighter than it is because you hecked up your painting or something like that. Or maybe it's you're doing a digital painting and you're doing a very light and bright world and you need a mid-tone gray or something. It doesn't have to be gray, it could be like any color. But maybe you're working with like a mid-tone gray and every time you work with it, it just looks too dark. Just lighten it up more than you think, like a lot more than you think. And it'll look like the color you want it to be, even though technically it's not actually the color that you selected. Color is weird. Like I keep saying, it's just weird. And there's a benefit to learning about optical illusions because you can bend them and twist them and manipulate them to your will if you need to. So let's get talking about mixing colors again. Can you tell this video is all over the place? I can't really stick to a topic. Mixing colors. Some of you guys might be mixing your colors and you're thinking to yourself, Biana, you are the worst. I have mixed my 3 colors and they all look terrible and I just have all these like mucky, weird middle tone things and I don't know what to do with them. Well, here's the thing. Primary colors, like if you mix red, blue, and yellow together, we know that that creates a very like uglyish, greenish, brownish color, right? It doesn't look very appetizing. Certain colors are just not gonna look good together, period. They're just not. And that's most likely because you're mixing too many primaries or too many colors that are opposite one another. But even if you do stumble upon an ugly color combination, let's say you mix orange and green together. Those aren't colors that I would mix, like personally on my own. It's not something that I would choose to do. But let's say I do, and I'm looking at the color spectrum of those colors. You might think, wow, this is really ugly, but if you look closer, you're going to find kind of rusticy, warmish toned oranges. You're going to find beautiful golden greens. There are pretty colors in there. You just kind of have to hunt for them. And don't be intimidated by ugly looking colors. Sometimes a color that looks ugly will look really beautiful next to something else. Again, with that whole optical illusion thing, sometimes putting something in a different color world will make it look different. So if you isolate a color, it might look really ugly and murky, but if you put it in the right setting, it can look like the most gorgeous jewel of a color that you've ever seen in your life. It's really, really weird, but you have to kind of select. Ugly colors tend to look really, really good next to pretty colors because the pretty colors will warm up and make those ugly colors look more vibrant, and the ugly colors will make the pretty colors stand out and show themselves off even more. So it's not a bad idea to mix them together. If anything, it's a really good idea to do it because if you're only focusing on pretty colors, you look at the picture and you're kind of like, well, it's a little fluffy. You want to kind of add in some kind of strange colors because then your eye can kind of move around a little bit and has a little bit more intrigue to work with. It's easy to fall into the trap of I just want to work with pastels and only pastels, but sometimes a gross green can really make the difference, you know? It adds another level. It gives it another like dimension to it because then you have areas to appreciate, areas to kind of rest, etc. Color theory ultimately is just all about creating a harmony with your palette, but then also just letting your eye be able to move around and know where it's going. It's a great way, if composition isn't your favorite thing in the world, and it should be, it's a great thing, but if it's not your favorite thing, you can use color theory to kind of help people dissect what it's looking at a little bit more. There's so many different ways to work with it. That's why this video is so convoluted because there's just so many aspects to it. And the other thing, the last thing I really have to say is find your signature color palette. Maybe you love doing warm tones, maybe you love doing saturated, maybe you like doing desaturated. Figure out what works well for you, build off of it every once in a while, play with it, experiment, and pretty soon you'll become very comfortable with the color worlds that you're creating. So, color theory is weird. Don't put too much pressure on yourself about it. If you want, you can watch my previous videos. They're old, they're rusty, they're kind of not great, but they have valuable information, so you can go ahead and watch them. And if you have any other color theory questions, you are free to ask them down in the comment section below, or shoot me an email, bianabova@gmail.com. If you send me an email, I can give you a very, very long, in-depth response, which is probably what you're looking for. So I'm just putting that out there. You can do that. I'm going to have a whole bunch of other tutorials and things coming up, which will go along with color theory, such as lighting. Lighting has a lot to do with color theory than you think, a lot more to do with color theory than you think, but I'm going to save that for another video because this video is already way too long. Anywho, I hope this made sense. And if you want to see my artwork, you can see it on Instagram or Tumblr or anywhere else that I'm online. It's all Biana Bova. If you want to see my videos, not only do you have to subscribe, but you have to hit the bell icon. I'm sorry, there's 2 buttons you have to click. YouTube's stupid. Yeah, I'll see you in the next video. I'm still trying to do 2 videos a week, so hopefully you can catch me on Wednesday. I'll see you later, guys. Have an awesome day. See you. Bye.